Let's jump into a subject on a lot of people's minds. We've heard a lot of news about this. This is AI and job loss. We'll begin with a short segment of Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, talking about job loss. Let's take a listen and then discuss it.
I really worry, particularly at the entry level, that the AI models are very much at the center of what an entry level human worker would do. A little bit more worried about the labor impact simply because it's happening so fast that yes, people will adapt, but they may not adapt fast enough, and so there may be an adjustment period. In terms of inequality, I'm worried about this. There's an inherent social contract in democracy where ultimately, the ordinary person has a certain amount of leverage because they're contributing to the economy. If that leverage goes away, then it's hard to make democracy. It's harder to make democracies work, and it's harder to prevent concentration of power. And so, we need to make sure that the ordinary person maintains economic leverage and has a way to make a living, or our society, our social contract won't work. And that's why
you've previously in the past said you've described a future where cancer is cured, the economy grows at 10% a year, the budget is balanced, and 20% of people don't have jobs.
The quote you just flashed is maybe too optimistic, maybe too sanguine about the ability for people to adapt. People have adapted to past technological changes, but I'll say again, everyone I've talked to has said this technological change looks different. It looks faster. It looks harder to adapt to. It's broader. The pace of progress keeps catching people off guard. I think the benefits are massive. And we need to find a way to achieve benefits and mitigate or prevent the harms. And the second thing I would say is, look, there are, as you mentioned, 6 or 7 companies in the U.S. building this technology, right? If we stop doing it tomorrow, the rest would continue. If all of us somehow stopped doing it tomorrow, then China would just beat us. And I don't think China winning in this technology is, I don't think that helps anyone or makes the situation any better.
All right, a lot there. And we've heard this, at an increasing pace and intensity. Dave, thoughts on Dario's commentary here?
Yeah, Dario looks really worried there, doesn't he? He's got the wrinkled forehead, and then Anderson Cooper looks even more worried. And rightfully so. I think the short-term job displacement is imminent. When I talk to people at random, people in power, far more people are in denial or doing nothing than are overreacting. So it's actually good for Dario to be saying these things to at least wake up the masses to the immense amount of change that's imminent. I do think there is a lot of short-term job loss coming, but far, far, far more opportunity being created. So it's kind of a foot race between creators, entrepreneurs, reinventing what people do versus automators coming and just automating away white-collar jobs and then ultimately robotics and blue-collar jobs.
Mo, you've been speaking about this for a while. Is Dario overplaying this, or is he spot on?
Oh, no, he's underplaying it for sure.
Underplaying
my predictions is 10, 20, 30, 40% unemployment in some sectors.
And what time frame?
In the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
I think everyone, there are always 3 questions to answer. One is, does anyone on this call believe that the technology is not going to catch up for, some of those jobs that, like a graphic design or a video editor, for example, those sectors are gone. I mean, today with Vio 3 giving you a minute of video that's better than Avatar for 17 cents, you can create the movie Avatar for around $1,500 if you make mistakes on the way, right? So that, I don't know how we can save those jobs, to be quite honest. If that's the case, then the next question becomes financial, right? Because, if we had not been stuck in a system of capitalism where the entire profitability of a business and the legal requirement of a CEO is to prioritize shareholder, gains, and accordingly, I do not see a situation where people will be given 2-day working weeks, paid the same. The third is ideological, to be very honest, because even things like UBI sound quite a bit like socialism or communism to me. So there will be quite a bit of resistance before we can get to the point where governments accept that these are systems that they will adopt. So in my mind, jobs will be lost in some sectors earlier than others, and we can name quite a few of those. But when they are lost, they're going to be lost massively. On the other hand, the ideology and the existing system will not allow us to replace that quickly enough because we're not awake. And I think the more interesting one in the statement that Darius mentioned is that he says 10% economic gains. I wonder, because how much of the US economy is actually consumption? 62% plus of the US economy is consumption. So with people having no buying power, is that economic growth or productivity growth without buyers to buy what we make?
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the arguments, of course, is you're demonetizing the product's cost because a latte is now made by a robot instead of a human, and it's, a quarter the price. Salim, you've been, in agreement on this. Anything else you want to point out?
I'd like to take the counterpoint, which is when we see like a huge raft of people standing at the job lines or at the food banks, etc., then I think we need to worry. I think we're underestimating how quickly people can adapt. Let's say let's use the video editor. If
and by the way, there's a video editor listening to this video right now.
That's funny, but let's the minute that you automate that, the video editor moves and does a whole bunch of other stuff that's necessary for producing a podcast like this. Right? There's lots of other work to be done. I still see. I go back to the 1970s bank ATM example, which we've talked about before. I do think governments are woefully underprepared. We should be running a ton of experiments on UBI or 4-day work weeks and managing that and getting used to that paradigm and knowing how will we roll it out if it needs to be rolled out. So why aren't they doing that? And if just as a separate thing, we do almost zero experimentation in government, and we could be doing a lot more of that. I think that's one area to look at. But we'll talk about truck driving in a bit. But when you go talk to a trucking company, which I actually went and did, talking about, okay, there's all these 3 million jobs that could be lost, etc. The truck driving company goes, I would hire 1,000 truck drivers today if I could. I just don't, they're not there.
Yeah.
I need the automation to do the work. So I kind of tilt towards that side. Now, I tend to be biased on the optimistic side, so I will grant you that. Let's see how this works out over time.
I'm just going to throw some numbers out here. Just from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. So 11% of office and admin jobs, 11% of the workforce is office and admin jobs, which have a very high probability of going away. 6% are business and financial operations. 7% are management. 6% are education, training, library. 6% are healthcare. 9% are sales related jobs. So there's large swaths of the labor force that, at least according to my search, are likely to be automated. And the question is, can they all be up leveled, right? So we're talking just in the quick research I did, it's something on the order of 40% of jobs that have a reasonable probability over the next 3 to 5 years of being automated away. And we'll get to this conversation a bit later. The issue is not can they be up level to a different position. The question is the social unrest in the interim. How hard is that going to hit society? Dave, what are you thinking?
Well, it's we're moving into an intentional world. We evolved in a world dictated by nature, and then we went through this transition where we're in right now. But the future is our design. It's not dictated by tidal forces, and it drives me nuts when the economists are extrapolating and predicting, but they never reference self-improvement. They never reference the exponential rate of change. And the intentionality of the world design is completely dominant from here forward. So it's what we decide to do. I think Dario worries all night about CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats from AI. And he's dead right. If you unleash AI into the hands of 8 billion people, some crazy person out there is going to turn it into a weapon. You have to actually put some thought into this design. But that was inevitable. That started with the nuclear era. And so now it comes down to, are we going to design a world that is good for people or not? And so I think it's completely in our control. I also really believe that, yes, there's huge amounts of job displacement coming because, as Mo pointed out, the natural capitalist action is to say, what can I automate away, reduce the cost by 99%? That all becomes bottom line profit. So the valuations of companies that automate are going to go way, way up, and it's going to create a huge amount of wealth. Where does that wealth land? And, as I've been saying on this podcast, it's naturally going to land in relatively few hands if nothing changes. And that's what's going to create all kinds of social unrest in transition. But the amount of value and the greenfield opportunity is so much bigger than the amount of job loss. And so if we're quick and intentional and we turn a lot of that AI horsepower into working on what can we build, if I can write 3 million lines of software in a single night, that's the equivalent of hundreds of millions of dollars of R&D in a single night. What can I build that is making people happier and more productive and feeling valuable and having a sense of purpose? And if we focus on that, we actually can avoid the dystopian outcome.
I love that, an intentional future. Let me move forward to this next set of slides here. Not to go into detail, but we see a plan for Tesla to roll out Model Y cars, fully automatic, aiming for delivery in June. So their rollout of their robotaxi begins in June. There won't be many cars. They're testing it out. I took my kids on a Waymo ride here in Santa Monica over the weekend, and they just had a blast. Put them and their friends in a Waymo, and we just drove around, and it felt like a carnival ride for the first few minutes, and then it felt completely like an extraordinary end-to-end experience. So these will roll out, and we're going to talk about the number of drivers that are taxi drivers, Uber drivers, the displacement here. This next article is about truck driving, and this makes the point made earlier. 18-wheelers are on the Texas highways driving themselves already. Just a quick video for a microsecond. But at the same time, the U.S. is facing historic driver shortages and recruitment struggles. We can't get enough drivers, as you said, Salim. So let's talk about this sector for a moment. Salim, do you want to kick us off?
Yeah, two points here. First is, before Uber came along, we didn't notice that there was this huge labor liquidity opportunity. And then Uber comes along, and all of a sudden a single mother can drop her kids off at school, drive for 4 hours, pick them up again that afternoon, right? And have a kind of a functional, much more functional world than before. And we soaked that up very quickly. We didn't notice that. We didn't notice it on the abundance side. I don't think we'll notice it as much as we automate also. I'm still banking and hoping that my 13-year-old will never have to get a driver's license. So we'll see when the curves hit of autonomous driving versus people wanting to. I think we'll just do as we've seen before, a ton more driving, and we'll just have a lot more little road trips and little errands that we didn't have to do now can be done by a Waymo or a Tesla. And I think we'll just have what we've seen historically repeatedly is that when you automate, you increase capacity, you don't decrease. And so in the truck driving example, I think we'll see a ton more truck driving that's autonomous, and the amount of truck drivers won't change very much. That's my prediction. Let's see if I'm right or not. Well,
you're going to love being in LA where the traffic's notorious. This also enables coordinated traffic. Our good friend Lee Hetherington from MIT days did all these traffic simulations back when he was an undergrad. And the roads are most efficient at about 45, 50 miles an hour back-to-back cars, and then they just jam right after that. But the self-driving cars also enable intelligent traffic flow design. And that's actually going to increase the capacity of their existing roadways quite a bit. I'm sure everyone in LA will love that.
The implications of self-driving cars on the environment, on being able to move electric battery packs all around the city, being able to get rid of parking, every garage at a single-family home could get turned into an extra storage or living room.
In LA, 60% of the land area is parking spaces.
It's insane. It truly is. I could not. So if you look back 120 years when you had the transition, or 110 years had the transition from horses to the Ford Model T, that transition was dramatic over the course of 10 years. I mean, the value proposition for a car was so much better than a horse, right? And the amount of horse manure was threatening society at an extraordinary rate, and then disappeared. The question is, when I look at the Waymo, it's an expensive car, right? The Waymo's coming in at something like north of $150,000. So you're not buying them and putting a fleet out. The Cybercab, if it really comes in at 30K or below, I could see Uber drivers buying a fleet of Cybercabs and having the Cybercabs work for them. But it's going to take that kind of a price point to really do a transition to the point where I don't need a car anymore. My AI is ordering it in advance of when I need it. I walk out the front door, it's waiting for me because my schedule is known by my AI. Mo, thoughts on?
I mean, well, I love you all, you know that. So please don't be offended by what I'm about to say.
Speak your mind.
All that you guys talk about is problems of privilege. It's like, my traffic jam, I want to make sure that my cab is waiting for me outside, and just go tell those things to the cab driver that actually is feeding 4 and working 2 shifts, right? Mm-hmm. And I agree with Dave 100%. We have a choice to design our future. Now, when you really think about it, and when wonderful humans like you are thinking this way, what do you think the choice will be? Your question, Peter, was how would that impact on civil unrest? Well, if they heard this conversation and how careless we are about their jobs, saying things like, yeah, they'll figure something out. I heard that a million times. What will they figure out? I want someone who tells me that we will find new jobs and upskill them. Tell me what those jobs are so that we start upskilling them.
Can I give an example here?
Yeah.
So I have a friend, when I was living in Miami, I met an Uber driver and I started playing tennis with him, and we had a kind of a fun interaction, and it was fascinating. He started driving for Uber, and then the amount of income dropped too much, so he started driving for Lyft. Then he did both for a while, and then both of them it was not worth it to be driving that much. So he starts renting out his car on Turo, and then finds, I can do this, and he starts renting 4 cars, buys 4 cars, and rents them all out on Turo. And then he helps a friend with his Airbnb rental, managing that, taking a cut of that thing. And over a period of like 3 years or so, he navigated all of these different dynamics. Wherever there were opportunities, he would go grab it, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it speaks to the enterprise and entrepreneurial nature of an individual. If you had a score that was called the entrepreneur quotient of an individual, they will figure it out. We talk often, Peter and I, about mindsets, right? If you drop Elon Musk into a desert with no money and no communications, he'll figure it out. He'll figure out how to get out of there
and make a rocket to go to Mars
and make a rocket out of that sand. And I think when you give people opportunity, this is why I think technology is so amazing. It speaks to Dave's earlier point. When you make this opportunity available, people are going to go for it. They're going to figure out, wow, AI can automate code. What could I automate? And they'll start doing that stuff. Then when this fellow got blocked by Turo for having too many cars or whatever, he created multiple IDs and was doing that. People are incredibly enterprising if you're able to turn on that switch. I think we're underestimating that capability.
So I love that, Salim. I'm going to come to this point a little bit later in a few topics, that I think the single most important job for the future, people say, what should my kid become? I think the only job that's going to survive in the future down the line is entrepreneur. And we have to reteach our kids how to think this way. We've had an entire civilization whose educational output is to train kids to get a job, rather than train kids to figure out what the opportunities are and create something around them, because the tools were not democratized. Well, the tools are democratized now. And so how do you train kids and adults to go out and find jobs. I put up this slide here. These are drivers by category in the U.S. And I'm sorry, we have a massive international viewership, but I'm defaulting to U.S. numbers here. 3.3% of the U.S. workforce are drivers. There are 2.2 million truck drivers. And down at the bottom on this list, we have delivery drivers, Uber drivers, bus drivers. At the bottom is taxi drivers at 200,000, right? So the number of taxi drivers has dropped precipitously. I do think, Mo, to answer your question, there is a future in which drivers are allowed to finance and purchase these autonomous cars, and they become managers of fleets of autonomous cars. And these cars are out there earning a living on behalf of those drivers.
This is definitely the American way, right? The American way is that we're going to enable everyone to buy a car, to make money on it without doing anything. Is that really true, guys? Like, honestly, if there is a margin that allows this guy to make money, why wouldn't Uber buy those cars?
They probably will buy many of those cars.
Yes, sir. Okay. The other question we're not asking, and I was told at the beginning of this briefing to be the extreme on one side, so please understand that. The other question we're not asking, and we definitely need to ask, is that this guy that's been renting those cars out, Salim, which I think is a fantastic example, is renting them out in an undisturbed economy where people have the purchasing power to rent them out from them. What kind of entrepreneur would make money in a UBI-based environment? What does that mean to a lot of people who don't have the purchasing power to buy from an entrepreneur?
Yeah, no, I totally.
I think I could answer that question. So what I found fascinating about this fellow, because every week we would play tennis and I would just track what he was doing. He found that certain types of cars were not renting at all because of that time of the year or that type of tourist visiting Miami or whatever. And so he was juggling constantly which cars he had or didn't have in his little fleet and adapting as it went along. At some point, he found that small SUVs were renting like hotcakes. And so he started working on that. And then he had to pivot again. And he just managed to navigate himself. And the question came up, what happens if you start? He got to a point where he was making enough passive income off these things that he didn't have to do the work. And then he was just voluntarily taking tennis lessons and teaching people tennis and being on a tennis court 8 hours a day. And I think there's a thread of an anecdote here of where people will start finding their true passions and just following those passions. And I think that's the beauty of a UBI. It allows you to do that. We've seen in the experiments where UBI has been done properly that entrepreneurship explodes. And if we agree with that general thesis, then this is absolutely the way to go. I'll go back to my earlier trope of governments being completely unaware and unable for this, because to move from a taxation job, union labor structure to UBI is such a huge flip that we have no confidence in public sector really getting us there.
So I agree 100% to that. Honestly, I think if we both agree that this is a future where it's possible, regardless of how low a UBI is, that people will go back to bartering and doing things through each other, through the offerings of each other, then I think that would work. But then governments need to be aware of that. We need to start thinking that this is going to be a future that we need to think about. But my ask of everyone is, in situations like this, it really is not helpful to keep trying the California way to paint the optimistic picture. Because if the optimistic picture happens, we're all fine, right? I think what we need to think about is what's the worst case scenario and guard against it, right? And the worst case scenario, if we're not prepared for this kind of job losses, economically and security, national security wise, is quite significant. People really need to be aware of that.
Here's another example of what's going on today, and it's going to change things. And again, it's both a disruptive force and an innovative force. This was a tweet put out by Matt Schumer. It says, "I put Claude 4 Opus in charge as CEO of my startup," right? And has seen significant revenue growth. He said, this is low risk since Claude 4 Opus is not in charge of HR or financial investments, but rapid iteration of the products and services. So We've been speaking about this for a while. When do we see the first $1 billion one-person startup, and then soon thereafter, $1 billion zero-person startups as agents with crypto are beginning to create new opportunities? Now, one of the things that we haven't mentioned is this potential future comes with massive GDP growth, massive, revenue growth. And where does that revenue go? Mo, you mentioned that a few minutes ago. Is it all being concentrated in the magnificent whatever, rather than magnificent seven? We're going to see all of these AI companies that are, trillion-dollar companies. How do they get taxed? How does the money get redistributed so we avoid revolutions? Thoughts on this, Salim? Is this the future of an EXO, an exponential organization?
The natural outcome, as we, it used to take like 100,000 people to create $1 billion company a century ago. Then it dropped to about 50,000. About 4 decades ago, it was 10,000, and now it's like 10, right? Or 3, as we talk about it, or as Sam Altman goes, it'll be 1. We will get to 0 at some point. We're just spinning off ideas autonomously that then just generate a lot of value. I think Dave's point from the beginning was really a key one, is where does that value accrue, and how do you navigate that? And right now we tax labor. We're going to have to tax capital much more aggressively in the future to navigate this.
Dave?
Well, a couple of case studies on this, Peter. So, we've seen Mercor is very, very good at interviewing people all over the world, any language, any culture, and discovering latent talent. So now you turn that same energy inside your organization. Suppose you've got 1,000 people, 10,000 people inside an organization. There's latent talent in there everywhere. Largely, historically, people have climbed the corporate hierarchy by kissing ass and schmoozing and buying beers, and it's not really correlated with being good at your job. And that drives a lot of very talented people nuts, especially if they're from a different culture, they speak a different language, whatever. You can't really ass kiss effectively if you don't speak the same language. But all of that, actually, you saw this with the X Prize board notes. Remember that 3-hour, 4-hour long X Prize board meeting we had? I took the whole transcript, put it into the LLM, and said, give us 4 or 5 suggested KPIs that would help this organization stay on track. And it does an amazingly good job. And so using AI as a management tool is kind of way underappreciated. Everyone's like, oh, I'm going to make videos. Oh, I'm going to build a self-driving car. I'm going to all these ground level things. But at the top of the hierarchy, it's actually even more effective. And so the good spin on it is it's very, very good at being fair and unbiased and discovering latent talent. I'm sure Mo will tell us there's definitely another side to it. But
am I now already getting that reputation? Is this who I am?
Sorry, didn't mean to categorize you.
I do see a different side to it. I think what you're going to see quicker is not just AIs with the CEO being an AI, companies with the CEO being an AI. I think the opposite is going to see. You're going to see more of, which goes back to entrepreneurship, where you have a company that only has a CEO and everyone working in it is an agent, right? And it's like one of those companies. The more intelligent the AI agents becomes, I'm sure every one of us worked at a point in time in a company where the CEO was a total idiot, but the team below them, was good enough that the company ran well. So the top management, those AI agents will do almost everything, and the CEO will become just happy counting the money, basically.